Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to A Gathering Place, brought to you by the Geechee Chamber of Commerce. And our topic today is John Lewis, Good Trouble. We are going to recognize the legacy of the late John Lewis and what he leaves, not only our beloved community, but the global community. Some people have called him a saint, and I would not disagree with that. And he's a giant in the civil rights movement, but he's also a giant in American and global history. And we have two special guests today joining us for our topic today, John Lewis, Good Trouble, because we're going to talk about what we need to do moving forward as a community. My first guest is joining us is Mr. Jamarr Brown. Hi, Jamarr. How are you?
Hey Marilyn, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for
Good.
joining us today for our third Sunday politics talk.
I know
Uh,
it's time. Everything we talk about in private now, everybody can see it on full display.
that's right. That's right. And it's unfortunate circumstances this weekend, but it's
Mhm.
also a celebration of a life well lived. So looking forward to this conversation. And we have a special guest today because our
Yeah.
regular Brandon Upson he's unable to join us today, but we send him best wishes and
Mhm.
everything, and we'll see him next month on the third Sunday when we talk
Yeah.
politics. But we want to welcome Miss Ebony Hughes. Hi,
Hey,
Ebony, how are you?
good. How are you guys?
We're doing good, thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you for having
Ebony is president of South Carolina Solid, an emerging political organization in South Carolina, and we're going to talk about that a little bit too as we commence our conversation. But today's topic, we want to remember and celebrate the late John Lewis, civil rights American giant, and also some people are calling him a saint. And of all people, I think that's actually an apt description of Representative John Lewis. Jamar, what are your thoughts regarding this great loss, but also a celebration?
And thank you, Marilyn, again as always for having us. I feel like I'm a regular now, so
You
I'm
are,
so
you
used,
are.
I'm so used to being with you. But one of the things I also want to lift up as well is that we also lost C.T. Vivian,
Yes, yes.
another civil
Thank you.
rights icon as well. And so I think we'd be remiss if we also did not mention him. And really, the fact that we lost them both on the same day
Yes,
is something that's huge for our community. And I even posted on my own personal Facebook page, that our legends are leaving, right? Earlier this year, we lost Reverend Lowry.
yes,
Over the past few years, we've lost many of those civil rights leaders. And so we have a responsibility at this point to really take on the mantle of the leadership that they offered our community. And one of the things I think that's important about John Lewis is, he wasn't 80 when he started, right? He was, in his early 20s. And I
that's
got
right.
involved in politics when I was like 19, 20 myself,
Hmm.
because I was inspired by someone like John Lewis, that I didn't have to wait until I was 50 and had a lot of money. And so you're talking about 70 years,
Yes,
in all the lessons and all of the battles, all the scars, all the wounds that he endured, not just for himself, but on behalf of our people. And so, this is a tremendous loss for Black America. This is a tremendous loss, I know, for Georgia and for Atlanta's 5th congressional district, that he represented for 3 decades plus. And so
hmm,
we have, like I said, a responsibility to, take on the mantle, but we also have a responsibility to do that in a reasonable, decent, and responsible way.
yes,
And we have to really rely now on the lessons that they've taught us. And we talk a lot in the community about ultimately, right, like more young people being involved, but there are people like John Lewis who taught us the roadmap.
yes,
And we're going to talk about good trouble, right? But he
yes,
gave us the roadmap of how we advocate for ourselves on critical issues. And it's time for us to not just look at the playbook, we've got to act on the playbook. And he's laid it out for us. And so, what are we going to do in this moment that we are facing this pandemic? What are we going to
yes,
do in this moment when we are facing increased police brutality and the increased danger of Black lives in this current moment? And it's almost like this uprising happened is how he got involved,
yes.
right? Is that
Hmm.
he was one of the original speakers at the March on Washington
Yes,
many years
23. He
ago.
was 23
He was
years old.
23 years old, right?
Hmm.
And I'm 33 now. And
Hmm.
for me, it's one of those things where that history is gone. And so we have a responsibility to redo some of that work, now with a new generation. But it's so interesting that we have to do this across each generation has a new battle, but the
Yeah.
battle still goes back to the racism because we've never dealt with it. And so I don't
Yeah.
want to ramble on, but for me, that's what that loss meant. Is that our community is in a state of sorrow. I think I froze for hours. I couldn't even talk. But I also think that we are called upon this responsibility. And so I'm looking forward to discussing more with you and Ebony about what that really means for all of
Yes, yes. And thank you, Jamar. I think also like you, yesterday it was a troubled day for me. I actually was
us.
very emotional. Didn't cry, but it almost felt like there was a cosmic shift in the world for me, and that's the way I took it. So, Ebony, I would love your thoughts regarding the loss of John Lewis, and also CT Vivian has Jamar noted. And Jamar, thank you for reminding me of that. That also was a giant in the civil rights movement. Ebony, your thoughts regarding the loss of these two civil rights um, giants.
Coming in, and so thank you again for having me on the show. Following behind Jabbar is kind of tough because I think he said everything. I could not have said it any better. Um, it's it's a bittersweet thing because I grew up, learning about first Dr. King, and then when you understood the men that walked with him, beside him, who mentored him and guided him, and to understand that at that time he was the youngest one. And again, back to Jabbar, thinking about my age now, that was the same age these guys were out there doing the exact same thing, which is fighting for political and social justices. But I was sort of shocked that both Reverend Vivian and Mr. Lewis had died on the same day. And it, again, it just did something to me that they both passed on the same day. And it feels like it was almost, it put a fuel inside of me almost. I can remember when my grandmother, they had it on the black and white TV at the time. They couldn't even afford a color TV. And she was telling me about when Dr. King was shot and killed. And that just ignited the people. And I feel like, in a certain sense, it's doing the exact same thing. When I heard about both of their passing, not just myself, I got calls from other people that said, Ebony, more now than ever, we have to go out and advocate in the community. We have to go out and make sure that people are not only registered to vote, but voter education. These guys were beat across the head. Some people were killed just for these very rights. So my sincere condolences to the family, but I'm so thankful for these men.
I know we're going to get to this. I know the voting rights bill is out there, and they're considering changing it to the John Lewis voting rights bill, if it's not already named that, because they've been throwing out a lot of bills that should be named after him. But I do want to note this, that I was watching MSNBC earlier today, and they had representation from the Asian Pacific Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, and the Congressional Black Caucus on their show, and how John Lewis impacted all three of those demographics, and how they were just so humbly grateful to him and his presence. And it is a loss of a major moral voice, and that they would call on him. And you don't we in some ways we took him for granted, because I just remember seeing him all over the place, and so many people were posting pictures with him because he was such a humble man. And I say all this to say, I actually think his legacy is bigger than voting rights. His legacy is bigger than civil rights. He is literally a global icon that has been lost, and spoke to the fact that all three of those demographics had representatives speaking to him in the most sincere, true terms of the loss that they're experiencing. And if you will, Jamar, speak to that, because I know you have some background with a variety of demographics. So speak to just that global impact of John Lewis.
Yeah, and I mean, Marilyn, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's very few people who are in this world who had that kind of impact, right? That it doesn't matter who they were, they respected him. Even people on the other side of the aisle who maintain a system of racism still had a
Hmm.
choice.
Mhm.
to respect him. And, that's another conversation, I'm sure, maybe later today or for another day. But one of the things I think that's important is that John Lewis was the representation of what justice was, is that justice
Mhm.
doesn't belong to your skin color or your gender identity or your sexual orientation or your socioeconomic background or how you grew up. Justice is about making sure that everyone is protected. And so Representative Lewis, or Congressman, excuse me, Lewis, was very, very clear about, ensuring that everyone was represented and that justice wasn't parsed out just for a few. And so that's when you talk about that international icon, that connects to everybody. Who doesn't want to have fairness? Who doesn't want equity? Who doesn't want compassionate leadership in their community? And so for me, ultimately, I believe that's what it is. And his legacy will live on throughout all of this. And one of the things we talked about the last time we were here is about power and how sometimes Black elected officials don't want to give up power. But what I loved about Congressman Lewis and many other members of the Congressional Black Caucus is that they do invest in young people through like the political boot camp and training and mentorship and internships and fellowships, because you do have to pass that on. Your real power is not just what you do here on earth. Your real power is, does your legacy and does the work you brought to this earth still carry when you leave? And
Very
so
true.
we are right now called to carry that legacy. And so we'll be talking about John Lewis, I believe, for the rest of my life. And I hope we will be, because of his many contributions, not just here in America, but even across the world, and what he's done. And so, to your point, he is a global icon, but it's well deserved, because he was right on the issues. And it's not just about left or right, black and white. It's about doing the right thing. And the right thing is always clear. And we all have a choice in our society whether we're going to do the right thing or not. He made the right choice to do the right
That's very true. And so Ebony, I want to ask you, because recently we've had some things in the media, situations in the media. For example, Nick Cannon, is that his correct name? Um, Nick Cannon.
thing. That's the one, man. You know how they
I'm,
say in the back of there. That's it. That's his name, right?
I'm speaking to my age. That said some anti-Semitic term statements, and there's been pushback regarding that. So my thoughts with a question of you, Ebony: do you think some of our folks in the community really get the legacy of John Lewis when he says good trouble, when he says necessary trouble? Because this is actually about crossing, has Jamar said, gender, race, orientations, to really work together to push forward has a community, has a nation.
Well, I don't think that the younger generation really understands what that was about. There's a picture circulating around with actually both Reverend Vivian and Congressman Lewis that had them in their mugshots. And then underneath that, it has them being decorated by the former President Obama. So what they did back then, they were put in jail because they were standing up for rights. You know, just like how you have here, they got into good trouble. It was necessary that they stood up and that they protest, just like people are doing now. I don't know if people are familiar with the term of good necessary trouble, but when you look around what's going on now into our political climate, there are a lot of people getting into some good necessary trouble. There are arrests going on with peaceful protesters. And so it alludes to the idea that they realize that certain actions are necessary, but they also understand that they could possibly get in trouble for it. So I think not until this week that some of the young have really grasped what that meant, but they're actually already doing it. So there's a little bit of a disconnect, but I'm really proud of the things that our generation of people are doing.
So specifically speaking, since you brought up the young generation and what they are doing, I know Jamar recently with Action Amplify Action, excuse me, a group that you advise, you featured Representative Maxine Waters, Congress member Maxine Waters, who is another one that is out
thing.
there reaching to our young people, encouraging us to do more than what we're doing now, and to understand the legacy that is handed to us, the torch turned over to us. What are your thoughts regarding Maxine Waters and her legacy as compared to, say, John Lewis moving
Yeah,
forward?
yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I can compare the two because I mean they're so unique in their own way, and both of them are well deserving of all the marks that they've received. But one of the things I wanted to follow up on what Ebony was saying about the younger generation when we talk about good trouble, the other piece about good trouble is doing the thing that's necessary, but also doing the thing that makes people uncomfortable. The system will never change until the people that benefit from it are uncomfortable to a point where they will make the change, right? And so that shows up in a number of ways, whether it's voting, whether it's voting people out, voting people in, legislation, all of those different pieces. So I wanted to add that if I could,
Right.
to what she was sharing. And then
Oh.
to your point about Congresswoman Waters, I mean, this one of the things is that we lift up is that Black women have been the centerpiece for our community for so long, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
It's the Black women that did not get the necessary media attention, right? But Rosa Parks sat on that bus, and did she get as much attention as John Lewis, who spoke on at the Lincoln Memorial, right? But those both work together, right? And so our community's got to come together, and that's what I love about Congresswoman Waters and Congressman Lewis is that Black men and Black women have to stand together in this. And so, and we all have different roles to play, and so we have to lift up Black women like Maxine Waters because ultimately, while John Lewis was giving the speech of his life, Rosa Parks was sitting on that bus, still fighting down there in Alabama. And that's just as important as standing at the Lincoln Memorial. And so we've
That's
got to
so
make
true.
sure that we are lifting up our sisters in this work. And Congresswoman Waters is a representation of the role that our sisters have played, even in uplifting Black men and pushing Black men. And so folks like John Lewis, who would always stand with her and always support her, it's our responsibility as Black men also to then come back and lift up our sisters because we're not going to get the liberation with just Black men or just Black women. We're only going to get the liberation together. And so their individual legacies and then them working together as members of Congress will show us how we get to liberation as a united front.
That's
And
very true.
that's
Very
so
true. And Ebony, your thoughts regarding that?
what I'd like to say is that when it comes down to women and Mr. Congressman Lewis, when they were fighting for these rights, you have to understand their role that they played in women's rights.
Mhm.
That's a huge thing. Even once voting rights were given, women were still suppressed, for a very long time. And again, how Congress Lewis he fought so that people like Maxine Waters can. So that's just my perspective on that.
Yeah,
Very good.
absolutely. And that's one of the things that's important as well as, why this movement has gone on for so long is because people only got rights individually, right? It's, the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote, right? I believe the 19th, let me make sure I'm right. But, I'm sure this video will go viral if I'm not. But, um, but, we talking about that's white women, right? Black women were still fighting. And it took, folks like Coretta Scott King and Rosa Parks and Barbara Jordan, and we can go on with the Black women that have played leading roles, even not getting the same attention as Andrew Young or C.T. Vivian, etc. And so when we get to a point where we can pass laws that everybody has rights, that's when we have justice, because white people don't have to go to Congress every 25 years to reinstate their right to vote, right?
Mhm.
The fact that we even have
Mhm.
to talk about naming the act as the John Lewis Act, 50 plus years after, why is it even in Congress? It should have been law then, or where is
Mhm.
our constitutional amendment,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
That white women got, and that they're protected for the rest of their lives. And so that's what I mean when I say we still have work to do. And John Lewis and Maxine Waters and all these folks move the needle for us. But it's our responsibility with some of this new technology, new access for my generation. We're in rooms that those folks were not in at the initial beginning. And so we have that responsibility to say, we're not just going to restore the Voting Rights Act, we need to make it permanent and wherever that we can find that opportunity, because we don't need to be fighting this again in 25 years.
Exactly.
No, we don't want to be fighting these same battles, and all too
Right.
often we have been fighting those same battles over and over again. But hopefully, this is a new day regarding that. And we will see moving forward because it's more than just talking the talk. We've got to walk the walk. And by the way, Jamar, you were correct. It was the 19th Amendment.
Okay, good, good. I won't be viral. I won't be on the shade room today. Okay,
All
great.
right, very good. I was pretty sure you were, but Google is our friend, so I had to
Yeah, no,
Google it
that's
really quick.
right.
I said, no. I was like, let me make sure. All right, Ebony. Quick question. I'm going to back up on this a little bit, y'all, because we kind of dove right into it. But Ebony, what is to you good trouble?
Wow, that's a deep question. I wish it's a lot of things that we can consider good trouble. Back then what we're doing now would be considered good trouble because we were not even allowed to speak openly. They'd have to meet, and I've had conversation with you where they had to meet at night. They couldn't even be caught talking about it. So now that we have the rights to be able to get together like how we are right now, good trouble may be just what we're doing, putting on protest. We see a lot of
Educating.
educating people. There are a lot of things that the pandemic has exposed, things that have been going on for years, that we can talk about loud, educating the people about what's going on. That's, in my mind, that's good trouble, because you could be attacked really still in 2020 for saying and talking about the things that we're talking about. But it's the, excuse me, it's the truth.
I was struck recently, Jamar, by a young man who I can't remember. I think it was a trailer for an upcoming show like this. And he was talking about he's not afraid of getting arrested. He's afraid of getting killed by the police. So what are your thoughts regarding that and how it is, has Ebony just kind of segueing a little bit from her? What are your thoughts regarding good trouble? But not only good trouble, people forget that John Lewis tagged on a little bit more to that and said necessary trouble. So what are
Hmm.
your thoughts regarding good trouble and necessary trouble?
Yeah, and I mean they're separate but also mutually together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I think that's important for me, how I look at it, up to even Ebony's point is, I look at good trouble as what is the thing that's going to move the needle for the most people, and what is the thing that you have to be able to do, right? And somebody just said in the comments, I'm looking at the comments while I'm talking, but that it's the trouble, right? Who we are as a people, right? Who we are as individuals, who we are as community members. What are our values, right? Good trouble is standing firm, as we see in the comment, right? What's the moral ground that we have here, in this particular work? And then for me, the necessary trouble is the things that have to happen to make the good trouble reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that he crossed that bridge anyway, right? Knowing what was on the other side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Leading other
Mm-hmm.
people on the other side. And like, he said many times in different interviews or different documentaries where, he was beaten on his head almost to a pulp,
And
basically.
yeah, his head, I mean, he had a
And we are
fracture for the
thankful
rest
for
of his
God's
life.
covering, and
Mm-hmm.
for God's covering and how
Mm-hmm.
God covered him in the middle of that. And,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things is that a lot of our civil rights legends have lost their lives. Martin Luther King, MLK was, assassinated for
Medgar
fighting for
Evers.
people.
Mm-hmm.
Medgar
Mm-hmm.
Evers was killed
Mm-hmm.
after being innocent, found innocent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, these are the pieces that are important. And so, I believe that necessary trouble comes in your sphere of influence. And so, for some people, that's peaceful protest. For some people, that's going to jail. For some people, that's marching to Capitol Hill, to advocate. Some people, that's running for office.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, that's distributing PPE in their community right now
Mm-hmm.
because nobody else has even given them, any mask or sanitization or sanitizer, right, to be able to do
Definitely.
that work.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I think when we talk about necessary trouble, we don't need to pigeonhole people because all of it has to work together. So there's the community folks that are saying, yes, ultimately, these are the things I need from my community. And if y'all won't do it, I'm going to do it. And that's the trouble. And so I believe that's one of the things, that you'll see. And the last point I'll make is we just talked about Portia Williams, who's on the Real Housewives of Atlanta, and
She was
how her and I
arrested.
believe almost 90 people,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just got arrested. That's
Mm-hmm.
the necessary trouble. No, we're not
Yes.
playing. We have called into the Attorney General's office. We have sent letters. We have sent emails. And so since he wants to play around, we're going to come to your house.
Mm-hmm.
And they went
Right.
to his house and they were willing to be arrested. And now he's trying to charge him with felony.
Yes. Yes.
Those cases, those charges are being trumped up in so many
Yes.
words. And
Yes.
so that's one of the things that's really important. And one of the things that we're seeing as part of that necessary trouble is that sometimes we got to take our own people. Because there are some black people, as they say, all skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? That man
Mm-hmm.
is black, but he worked for Mitch
Mm-hmm.
McConnell and he is pleasing Mitch McConnell versus pleasing his people. And so they
Mm-hmm.
had to go to his house to be able to do it. So that's what we talk about, the good trouble is saying, I know what's on the other side, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to do it anyway if it moves the needle for our people. John Lewis crossed that bridge. Portia went to that man's house. And if that's what
Yeah.
you have to do to get the attention, that's what you have to do.
That's
Right.
right. And yes, they were charged with felonies while we are still waiting for the police to be arrested for Breonna Taylor's murder.
That's
And that's
right.
what they were protesting, folks. So you're correct. That is the necessary trouble. And I know, Ebony, you got something to say about that too and add to it. What are your thoughts regarding that?
Man, those ladies are powerful. And you know what? Much power to them because that was necessary. Like you said, people have been praying and sending letters and doing everything necessary, the
Hmm.
peaceful way. And granted, these ladies were peaceful, but when they showed up and show up and show their face, hey, we are demanding a response. We are demanding that you hear us because when I sent something to you, you didn't hear me. And that's how people are feeling. And for everybody, all 90 of them. But I'm so glad that celebrity was there. She was willing to take that hit because she's a face to all.
Using her power, the
Yeah,
power of her
Absolutely.
celebrity.
right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So to
And
get
we need more people doing that.
we
Yep.
need more people doing that. Go right ahead, Jamarr.
No, no, no. I was just chiming in. I don't want to cut you off because I mean that's one of the things. I mean because we all have a sphere of influence. I mean I'm not on
Mm-hmm.
TV, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's still things that I can do. And so yes, we support Portia and the other celebrities that were there. But also, what are you doing in your community? That might
Yes.
not be on Instagram. That might not
Yes.
make the news because that's
Mm-hmm.
necessary and important trouble, as well. And then the other thing that I'll add is that this a lot of people were going back and forth. Well, she shouldn't have gone there and this and that.
Why?
One of the things is whatever the necessary steps are, black people, we've got to stop tearing down people for the steps they take, especially those
Amen.
ones who are not willing to take action.
That's
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't look at me and point at me what I'm doing when you're not doing anything yourself.
That's
that's
And
right.
so, ultimately, if it takes Portia going to his house and getting arrested, that might be fine. I might go distribute masks in my community to make sure people don't die from this pandemic where we're dying at disproportional rates. None of it's better than the other. It's all necessary because we're there fighting for the liberation and for the lives of black people.
that's
And so
right.
we've got to stop also pigeonholing people to say you only can do these things. And if you go out of this realm, then somehow, you've lost your mind. We've got to also stop doing that too. Is that if Portia went and got arrested, I went on her page and said, thank you and much respect to you. Right. And if that's not my tactic, that's okay. But I'm not going to put her down in her tactic.
That's
Right.
very good. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Jamar, because I have noticed that thread in Twitter and on Facebook. And social media is a good tool of communication, but it could also be a bad tool of communication. And I do tend to see a thread sometimes where people are judging, well, you did that and you shouldn't have done that. But who are we to judge? And
Hmm.
what measure are you using to judge people? Because more than likely people said she shouldn't have been there because she's a celebrity. Well, actually, she should have been there because guaranteed one, her celebrity brought more attention to that matter. And
Hmm.
also, I believe the charges have been dropped, and her celebrity probably got the charges more so dropped, maybe a part of getting them dropped because they don't like to be exposed.
That's
Sunlight exposes and cleans stuff. So you
mhm.
got to use your power of influence
Right.
to, as you say, move that needle. So bravo to Portia
Yes.
That's
for
right.
for taking it, because she let's be honest, she could have lost maybe contracts and stuff, and, and,
That's
Yeah.
and we may still don't even know that quite honestly is not our business, but for her to step out and do that,
right.
we should applaud that. and,
Applaud her.
and we also need to recognize that we all have a role to play.
I'm
Just
glad
because
you said that.
somebody is not out there marching doesn't mean they're not doing anything. They might be writing letters to the editors.
Right.
They might be speaking in public comments during city and county council meetings. We all have a role to play, and we need to recognize that. Just like I believe John Lewis really understood that. I believe Vivian really understood that we all had a role to play. Because let's be honest, more people knew about John Lewis, but C.T. Vivian was a logistical architect of the civil rights movement and had a huge role to play.
Yes.
But we cannot, one was not more important than the other. We have to be very careful that white supremacy and oppression of our people doesn't get in our head also, that we start oppressing our own people by judging them, because we all have a role to play. And I'm just putting that out here because we are running into that. And I'm not going to get into colorism this show, but we're going to have that conversation too, because I see that thread happening too. But
Yes.
anyway, we're going to have the, I'm just letting y'all know we're going to talk about that on another third Sunday. So, Ebony,
But you know what? If I can
any
also,
thoughts you have?
is if I can also add to that, and this is so important. Some people think that, I don't know where I fit in. Right where you are is where you fit in. Just like, for example,
Hmm.
a couple days ago, right here in Georgetown, there was a fraternity that got together right in front of Walmart to pass out masks. If that's where you are, do work from where you are. If you're a teacher, there are things that you can do as far as an education right where you are. No matter where you are, if you're involved in organizations or churches, that's what it takes. So always know, no matter what color you are. So we're not excluding white people. We white people have always been part of our allies, and for the ones that are for us, even with them and where they are, they can use their positions to help the movement, and that is so that's necessary. I know sometimes you don't want to think of it that way, but we need everybody's involvement in order to move this thing forward. And as far as in the Black community, I'm glad you said that, because we need to be careful about how we talk down about people, because we don't know what the motives. And again, just because you wouldn't do that, that doesn't mean that it wasn't necessary for that person to do it.
Hmm.
Very good. And we don't know not only the motives, we don't know the influence people have. And that just comes from simply being a human being on this earth. We all have influence. And part of our problem is when you lose sight of your own humanity, you tend not to see the humanity of other people. And that speaks to the current resident in that White House. He has no idea about his humanity. How do we expect him to see our humanity? And that's actually very much an underlying problem. The one person we do know who saw the humanity in all of us was John Lewis. That is why we are sitting here today honoring his legacy and knowing that his legacy is going to be here 50, 100 plus years from now. Where Donald Trump, he is just a typical white man with money, which really makes him very weak. And we need to understand that. And that goes back to why we all have an opportunity to step up simply as human beings.
Human
and
rights.
and human rights. Thank you. That's where I was going with it, Ebony. And I know Jamar got something to say about that too, because we whipping this one up. Before Jamar, before you speak, I got to do my station break though. Okay.
Okay.
I want to remind everyone that you are watching A Gathering Place, hosted by the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce every Wednesday and Sunday at 4 o'clock. You come on back and join us on Facebook Live and YouTube Live also. So, Jamar, your thoughts regarding human rights?
Oh Lord.
We
Well, one of the things.
just say it.
Well,
Just
well,
speak.
well, well, one of the things that I'll share, when it comes to human rights is I actually serve on the Human Rights Commission for the city of Austin here in Texas. And I was just elected a couple months ago as vice chair by my peers. And
Congrats.
I do thank you, Ebony, thank you. And one of the things that I have been learning in that new role is, how to navigate city government, because a lot of the conversations we have are influenced by the national conversation, right? But the impact is so local, right? And so we just passed a resolution about a month ago that basically called for the city council to look at divesting funds from the police department and moving those funds to systems like affordable housing and mental health awareness. economic justice, right? Because one of the things that's important about human rights that I am learning is there are a lot of socioeconomic factors that lead people to even be in the position to be vulnerable to the police, to white supremacists,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
To having their lives taken. And a lot of times, the police will look, for example, at a homeless black person or someone who's not in a home, right, and treat them one way versus someone like me who's, professional, have my college degree, and because I've noticed how cops speak to me, they're very, "Hi, Mr. Brown. How are you?" I've never had a
Mhm.
negative encounter like that,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
I've watched my brothers, right, who may not have the same socioeconomic status as me, be treated an entirely different way and look exactly like me.
Like
And so
second.
one of the things that we've got to make sure that
Mhm.
we are connecting with human rights in the conversation is the basic, as you said, Marilyn, the basic humanity is why you need rights, right? We shouldn't even have to legislate rights. I mean, let's just talk about that. That's the whole conversation. But because we're advancing rights for people not because of political gain or financial gain, we're advocating because it's just the right thing to do, right? It's
I'm
that
glad you said
people cannot be fired because of their sexual orientation, right? Or
Mhm.
people cannot be beat down in the street because of their skin color, right? It's we've got to make those connections when we're looking at our legislation. It's not just about the dollar. It's not just about the political power and who holds office. It's about how do these laws impact and cover and protect basic human beings and basic humanity. And
Right.
if we don't get back to that point, we will still be fighting these same battles. We will be cussing each other out on Facebook and everything else because because at the end of the day, I don't even a lot of people they don't when they see us on here right now, they don't see us as human beings. They see us as talking heads or
Mhm.
who they think they are. And when
Mhm.
you get past the who they think they are part and just say Jamar, Marilyn, and Ebony are human beings and they deserve the right to live in this country peacefully, that's when we'll move the needle on human rights. And that's what John Lewis was trying to teach us is I don't care what you look like. I don't care who you love. I don't care where you
Mhm.
come from. You have a
Mhm.
right to vote.
Yep.
You have a
Mhm.
right to exist. You have a right to
Mhm.
not have to be fearful of the police, right? You have a right to choose what you do with your body. And that's where we got to get back to. So I know
And when
Ebony has something to jump
and
in.
when we realize that, what a day of rejoicing that will be. Ebony, I know you got some thoughts.
I do. You know, rights are one thing, and I think Jamar said it the best. It's just about doing the right thing. So, you have just, I think, this disconnect with rights, certain things that are already rights that are just not carried out. People aren't held accountable. You think about just right here, you have that socio-economical disparities in one area. Everybody's entitled to basic human needs, such as running water. Believe it or not, there are places right here in Georgetown that do not have water
Running
and
water.
sewer.
Mhm.
And it's shameful. And people that live in the very same county on the rich side, okay, they have all the amenities, they have upgraded parks, things of that nature. And you have the lower end, poor white people, also that are affected that don't have these basic needs met. So at what point do we go from basic human rights, which all people have the right to actually making sure that all people's needs are met? And that's the thing that Mr. Lewis stood for. We don't care how much money you have, and as far as in that, even with voting rights, you looked at what happened during the primaries here, what, a month or so ago, where people wanted to vote in the rich neighborhoods because their machines happen to be working. There in the other areas where voting, the machines were not working, the lines were really long. So we need to make sure that we're carrying things out straight across the board, regardless of who you
Mhm.
are, how much money you have.
It is
And
interesting. Go ahead, Jamar. Go ahead.
so I want to add something because it's crept up in my spirit. So I got to add
Mhm.
it. And one of the things, like Ebony said, like there's always like in a lot of cities, and I tell people about Charleston all the time where I grew up. It's always like a tale of two cities. And you have
Mhm.
to ask yourself, why is that, right? Why do they have good voting machines, good grocery stores, running water, right? Basic necessities, and this side is always struggling. And one of the things that I've been, having a conversation with friends about is, we always hear this saying, pull yourself by the bootstraps, right? And this
Mhm.
white supremacist system that's been built to basically say, do what you need to do. Here are the steps you need to take, even though everyone doesn't have access to take the steps that's necessary. And then they'll say, well, I got here because I pulled myself on the bootstraps. Some people just got there just on how they look and who they knew at the right time. And so what we've got to do is make sure that we are operating in a system that's not, you can't tell me to pull myself by the bootstrap and then stand on the same boots you tell me to pull up.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Thank
that's
you.
where we've got to get to human rights is, I don't have running water. What system did you put in place that I wouldn't have running water? And why would you have a country that is supposed to be the top superpower in the world, but people don't have running water, right? That's not a thing to be prideful about. And so you've got to make sure that, we have that part of the system is not just saying, pull yourself by the bootstraps, or like somebody said, have the boots first. But then even when they have the boots, then you stand on the boots and then put the onus on them. And that's not humanity. When we talk about human rights and going back to the person. So that just made me think when Ebony
thank you, Jamarr, for bringing that. And I want it's a very good point. And in our audience, I just want to say this: let us end the American myth that these people pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. No one in America has pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. Even we could go back to when they moved west. The government slaughtered Native Americans first of all, then took their land and gave it to people either free or very cheaply. So that's not pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. This is why it's so important that we need to know history and understand history beyond memorizing dates and memorizing events. History is about choices people make.
That's it.
And that's from the basic, normal, everyday neighbor that we have ourselves. It's a ripple effect. History is based on choices that we make because we all have free will, and the ripple effect that goes up to our elected officials, goes up to our founding fathers, and etc. So let us end today the American myth that people pull themselves up by their bootstraps, because even in our Constitution, as opposed to say natural law, because that's what we've been talking about earlier, natural law recognizing the humanity in everyone, as opposed to constitutional law. The Constitution was written with Black people really not even mentioned in it, except for maybe 3/5 of a human, but it was written for white landed male land owning males. That's who it was written for.
That's true.
It left females out. It left African Americans out, other than 3/5 of a human. So we had to fight from day one for our existence in that Constitution.
Right.
So the constitutional law was setting up the system that is doing exactly what it's supposed to do: leave us out.
Right.
Leave us out. And we have been that one demographic from day one that has had to fight for African American rights and for women rights and for everyone else. Because if you see, when we fight the battle, along with our allies, Ebony, as you say, it impacts and benefits everyone.
Everybody.
All right. So I want that myth to end, and that's just my. I got to say my stuff. But Ebony, go ahead and say what you're gonna say.
There's this young lady, and her video went viral. They were trying to do a cleanup, and she talked about the monopoly and how it works. You know what, guys? I'm in the family that lived that. My grandfather was a sharecropper, and really sharecropping is only but legalized form of really slavery. And so my grandfather wanted his own. I think that's also part of it, the history, learning the right history, why things were the way they were. Why were Black people sharecroppers, which my grandfather was, and he was determined that he was going to buy his own farm. But let me tell you the disadvantages right there. He had to save for 5 years to get away from sharecropping. That meant my mother, when she was little, they had to go without food. They had to go without shoes. Their shoes, they said, was so tattered, my grandmother would have to sew the soles of them together. And he was denied loans from the USDA twice, and he was already a proven businessman. So there were very few people, Black farmers, Black people that were able to get away from that because of the financial hardships and the things that they had to go through. So you talk about somebody pulling up themselves from the bootstraps. You're fighting against a system that is most people are never able to overcome. That affects you in all different areas of life.
It does. It does. It does.
Yeah.
Very true. I
Yeah.
mean, and not only just as a farmer, the neighborhood that I live in right now, Virginia Heights, my parents' generation actually created this neighborhood. There were friends who owned the land who got together with their friends and family and said, we're going to create this development. And what ended up happening is they had to go all the way to Atlanta, Georgia to borrow money to build their houses. And it was during the civil rights. It was during the early 60s with the civil rights movement, and some money was loosening up. And they had to go to Atlanta to get that money because local banks would not loan to them because they were black. But
Wow.
let me tell you what this neighborhood gave us. So they built these houses. It created a middle class in Georgetown. Most of us educators, doctors, magistrates, business owners. So the next generation, my generation, who most of them moved out of Georgetown because of lack of opportunity because they were black. But if you look at that generation, it created that foundation where they went on to college. We're talking second, third, fourth generation college folks now who are now engineers, more doctors, more lawyers, more business owners. So we had to go to fight just to get the money. We had to go out of state to go get the money to build this neighborhood, but
Wow.
it gave us that foundation that we were allowed to grow. Now, that's the American dream we need to be talking about. But we don't talk about it because we're African American and we don't talk about that history. And that's why it's so important that this needs to go into our school system. That's why we are benefiting from John Lewis and what he did. We
Now,
are benefiting from C.T. Vivian. That
yeah,
is really, literally, you can literally see what MLK Jr. died for, that this neighborhood benefited from that. This is real stuff that we don't see in history books. We don't have people talking about because we're black. So they want to erase that history. But imagine if our younger folks and kids really understood what their sacrifices really impacted, what they really created. Jamar, I know you probably had something to say about that too.
No, y'all been doing it. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said here. So one of the things about the bootstraps, I mean, Marilyn, you talked about history and how
mhm,
history is so important about choices. We also have a choice to accept history, right?
Mhm.
And that's what people are choosing not to do right now, because I mean, you can't tell people also to pull themselves by the bootstrap when you stole the whole country. I mean, that's another conversation. So if you really want to suspend the myth, you have to really look at how did white people even get to this country? They came to this country, stole this country from people who were native here, who were on this land, and then built a system around those people
wow,
that oppressed the same people, and then turned around and said, "Oh, pull yourself by the bootstraps," when you didn't even have a strap to pull yourself, which
Thank
is why
you.
you had to steal from this group of people that were indigenous in this country and are still fighting, especially in this region of the country where I live in Texas, and so I had to just say that because I think that's the one thing that's important, and it's always we can't keep playing this game around our history and how around our progress of say this and do that, or we're going to pick this part of history and talk about that and not talk about that part. All of it works together. All
It
the
does.
choices, all the impact, all the actions, all work together. And we have a choice right now is to accept history, but also to understand it and understand the nuances of how they got to those choices. And then we get a choice to do it different,
right.
right? And that's the place where we are right now is what are we going to do that's different
Yes.
than what has happened, decades and centuries ago. And so that's the challenge that John Lewis has been calling us, Maxine Waters, C.T. Vivian, and we can go on the list. These folks that have been calling is saying this is our history. It is our history. We can't erase it, but we have a choice to change the trajectory of our people and our community. And what are we doing right now in our own sphere of influence to really be able to do that? And so for me, that's the place where we are. And then that's how we lift up young people. Like you said, I believe he was 23 when he spoke at the March on Washington, right? Is that what are our Black parents and grandparents doing to teach our children the history? But then what happens is they go to public school, right, in Georgetown and Charleston, and then they get pieces of the history.
Yes.
And the pieces of the history is the white people who don't want to tell the full truth to the
Hmm.
people about their history. So
Mhm.
you only get an abbreviated version. And so we have a responsibility to uplift organizations like the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce and other Black-led groups in these communities, Black museums, Black artists, right? Because ultimately, the public education system is built to not tell our full history.
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
what are we doing as a community to build organizations and entities and programs to give our children what the history is? So, my grandfather was very huge on this is what you need to know. And
Mhm.
I could go
Mhm.
to him and say, well, this is what we learned this week. And he would say, oh, that's not right. Or, oh, I need to add this piece, right, that you didn't learn in school. And so, also when you look at the public education system in South Carolina, I believe we didn't take South Carolina history till seventh grade. So how many years did our children miss of learning who they are and where they come from,
And
right?
when
And
we
so,
did, yep, and when we did take that history, it was written from the point of view of the Daughters of the Confederacy because they wanted to uphold that lost myth. So it was incorrect
mm-hmm,
history and, as you said, abbreviated or just part of the truth. And
mm-hmm.
it was miseducation.
But that,
We
but
were
that's the,
miseducated.
but that's the point, Marilyn, right? That's the
Mhm.
part of the premise and oppressive systems is to say we're going to build this system around you, not tell you the truth of how it's built, and then you need to go figure out how to deal with it. White supremacy is keeping people blind to their own history and blind to what's going on in their face.
Right.
And so we are seeing that, now across the country where you have a president who just makes stuff up as he goes. It's not real. He made
Right.
it up and he smiles in our face, and there are people who are applauding him. And you just have to look and just say, we're upholding and reinforcing a system of white supremacy when we choose not to accept the truth, when
Right.
we choose to spit out untruths to people. And so that's the work we've got to do around our history is we do have to accept it, but we also have a choice to change the trajectory. Go ahead, Ebony. I'm
And
sorry.
that no, you're fine. And really that you basically spit out the words I was about to say. That's the thing. We not only have to accept it, but we have to be willing to step up. Now, granted, as a
Mm-hmm.
kid, I was considered one of those canopy rippers. Considered just like all those civil rights leaders. There were canopy rippers, like they described back in the biblical days. They were willing to speak up. So when I spoke up and we learned about the Pilgrims and we learned about Thanksgiving and things like that in elementary school. Now we learned about that early, right? But when they said, "Hey, Christopher Columbus," he sailed over and he found the Americas, and they made friends with the Native Americans. And then, as a kid in elementary school, I was already thinking and said, "You know what? How could he discover it?" And there were people
Already here.
there. So when I asked the teacher, "Hey, there were already people here," then you kind of put in your place. No, that's not how it really was. No, that's not how it is. And the same thing now as adults, we're speaking out. We're wanting people to not only look into the history, but the education and how it's being taught. And it's no, don't say that. It's funny, I had a telephone call earlier today. Don't say anything about them. They could do something harmful to us. Don't say that. Don't say this. And I'm thinking, well, if we don't speak up and speak out, that's the good necessary trouble that we're going to have to sacrifice in order so that these things are brought to awareness and so that we can really go forth from now and do something about it. And so that's something that we can talk about. The things that we need to do to carry on that legacy that Reverend Vivian and Mr. Lewis had for us. They built this platform, and it's up to us to just carry on to go up and forward.
That's true. That's true. And that is, I'm glad you said, Ebony, that is the necessary trouble. The necessary trouble is getting over our fears and getting over these things that we think we should value, the material things, and really understanding what do you have to lose? What are you willing to stand up for? What are you willing to die for? That's the necessary trouble. When you make those decisions and you come out on the right side of history, you are going to do the necessary trouble. All right. So there's the good trouble and there's the necessary trouble. And as Jamar said earlier, they are interconnected and interlocked. But the necessary trouble, and it's my opinion, is you have to make a conscious decision to take action, even at great sacrifice. And John Lewis knew that because he knew as he was going across that bridge, he may die. But there's a reason that he had a good and fruitful life because he has an extensive library. And there's a saying that I picked up, and I can't remember where, but I like to say when we lose someone, we lose a library. But in John Lewis's case, we didn't lose a library because his entire life he was sharing knowledge with us. He was creating many libraries. So we didn't lose a library in him. We have to take a step back and recognize what we have gained. And from what we have gained, we have to take that knowledge and decide to make necessary trouble and
Well,
move forward with that. Go ahead, Ebony.
that's true. And I'm glad you said it that way. He was a library. And one thing they say, the best way to hide something from somebody is in a book. That is something I charge every single person to do. Don't just listen to necessarily things that are on Google. Google is a blessing and a curse in it sometimes, because we have to make sure that information is creditable. Do your research, do your history, understand the law, start with the Constitution. Because if you don't understand the very basics of like Marilyn, you like to say, how the fabrics of our country is woven, then anybody can pull anything over on your head. You have to understand not only the law, but the history that correlates with why those things were even set in place to begin with. So that is part of it. Is we're going to have to put in our head that we're going to have to educate ourselves, because for a little while, it's not going to be done in school, because it's only going to be done from a one-sided perspective.
Yeah, and we have to not only get educated, we got to get motivated, and we have to get activated. And you know, I like saying them three words, right?
Yeah.
Educate, motivate, and activate. We got to step out, folks. And so, folks, we got about 5 minutes left, and I want Jamarr give us some final words, some final thoughts as we are here honoring the life of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, and what is good trouble and necessary trouble. Any last thoughts, Jamarr?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Marilyn, again, always for inviting us here and having so many people. One of the things I want to share about the Gathering Place, and I tell people, Marilyn and I have known each other for eons. But one of the things I think that's important is that you have created this platform to really bring critical issues to our community. I mean, I've watched, you had multi-million-dollar business owners on here talking about economic prosperity and what that means. You've had, health professionals and doctors on here. You have folks like us who are doing more social justice awareness work. You've had historians. I mean, I could name it. And so how this platform, both the organization of the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce, but also this platform of the Gathering Place has grown over some time with your leadership, I think is really important to recognize. And then Ebony, I'm very glad to meet you and get to have some conversation with you and the work that you're doing in Georgetown and across South Carolina, which is home to me, I think is very important. But I think we named it all here. One of the things I think that's important is we didn't talk as much about the activate piece that you just brought up at the end. I'll share a little bit about that in the respect that, I'm a Christian, so I'm just saying this for my faith persuasion. But, there's a saying in the Bible that says faith without works is dead.
Come on now.
And, we can have all the faith, all we want, praying is great. Faith is great. And I'm not knocking anyone for their religious practice. However, I'm also sharing that God called us all to take action in some way in our sphere of influence. And that is what John Lewis and C.T. Vivian taught us, right? That a young man can get on the Lincoln Memorial and share words with the country. He can then go from there and lead people across a bridge to the onslaught of white supremacists that he could have risked his own, almost lost his life for people like you and all of us who are watching to even be sitting here having this conversation right now. Because we could have still been in place if they hadn't done anything. And so we've got to also make sure that we are being, mindful to, those pieces and how that's led us here. And so be thinking about how you can act, right? Whatever that is for you. It's not our job to tell you what to do. It's our job to encourage you to do something. And that's what John Lewis said. John Lewis said that you can go to the halls of Congress. John Lewis said you can go to the school board. You can go teach in schools. One of the things we don't even talk about in terms of advocacy is Black teachers in a school. Because for me, how many people didn't have Black teachers until later on in life, right? And I can tell you that teaching is an act of advocacy, right? What we're teaching our children in school and what they go home with and what they grow up with is a form of advocacy. Social justice activists, I see them all the time doing food drives and grocery drives and
distributing PPE and, free testing. I saw some folks in Bamberg doing some just free testing where folks could just go and get tested just to be safe. And so you be thinking about that in your sphere of influence. Everybody doesn't have to sit on the Lincoln Memorial or go to Congress. You can do it right at home. You can do it in your church. You can do it in your school. You can do it in your neighborhood. You can do it at the Walmart or the Target or wherever, the popping spot is where you live, right? And so no act is too small.
That's
And
it.
gotta stop. Everybody has a different calling, right? And John
Mhm.
Lewis's calling was to be in the halls of Congress. Somebody
Yes.
else's calling may be to do something else. And so you've got to touch base with yourself, make a choice, and say, what is my calling and what can I do? And one of the things that I learned from my great grandfather, he always said, that when you're born, you get a birth certificate. When you die, you get a death certificate. And that dash in between is what you have done to make your community and your people and this world a better place. And so that's what we have to be thinking about and carrying with John Lewis, that physically he's not here in this physically, but spiritually he's with us. And he has a platform that we have a calling to step on and move forward. And so we just bless his life and his legacy, along with CT Vivian, for what they've given us to this modern day and the energy that they will give us through the spirit to carry on. And so thank you all so much. Marilyn, thank you, Ebony, and everybody who watched.
Jamar, all I can say is in these times, I'm actually excited to be in 2020. I know we have a pandemic and everything that has happened since the murder of George Floyd, but as you said, we have a choice. And that should make people really excited to be on the right side of history. We have some choices that need to be made as individuals. So thank you for bringing that up. Ebony, any thoughts that you may have as we end this show?
I want to piggyback off of what Jamarr said. Guys, wherever you are, you can do something. For example, yesterday on my own show, Rap Sessions, we had DJ Mike Check on yesterday. He did a virtual voting rally where, again, he's a DJ. He put on a virtual show, and in between his music, he'd tell people, get out and vote. On the live feed, they put the website so that people can go on and register to vote, encouraging people in between the songs to make sure that they're educated about the candidates and who they're voting for. So it doesn't matter who you are. Even when I say youth, people my age, people younger, the children, you can do something in right where you are. Even if that means helping senior citizens, you are part of the solution, because in the end, it boils down to, just like Mr. Lewis said, it's a matter of just doing what is right for human rights and standing up for people. And all of us play a role in that. And again, it's part of it is in how we teach our children at home. When we were little, we had to go around in the community to make sure the senior citizens that their yards were raked. Parents, let your child be involved in different things of that nature if it's safe, to help. That's showing your child how to be a humanitarian. It starts there. Children have to learn about those things, and you're subliminally telling them that it's about us helping one another. So I definitely appreciate the life of Mr. Lewis and everything that he stood for and taught us. And I appreciate you for having me on the show today.
Thank you, Ebony. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your word, and also to you, Jamar. I do want to remark that I had actually the honor and privilege of spending about 30 minutes with John Lewis in Charleston a few years back when he was a speaker at the South Carolina Voter Participation Organization. He was the banquet speaker, and they had a for lack of a better term, after party afterwards. And we spent about 30 minutes together in the corner, just quietly talking about his book. I believe it was called Walking in the Wind at the time. And that was, to this day, I just kind of just got to go, wow, that's a privilege, that I had with him. But it speaks to the man that he was humble enough to spend some time with me, and just we literally sat in a corner for about 30 minutes just talking. I didn't take any pictures. I'm not the one to take pictures with folks that I meet, and I've honestly I've kind of met quite a few, but I'm just not a big picture taker, so I don't have a picture of that. But it's in my heart. It's in my mind, and that's where it really matters. And what he taught me in those few minutes it stays with me, and it also speaks to my activism also. And what also speaks to my activism, Ebony, speaking about a little bit of what you just said, is what my family taught me. And
Right.
that's an honor in and of itself and a privilege that I grew up in a family that taught me about civil rights and human rights and education. So that's something that I carry with me on my journey. I want to, so thank you. Thank both of you for coming this evening. This has been a wonderful discussion. I want to remind everyone that this coming Wednesday at 4 o'clock, a gathering place, we're coming back to you, and joining us will be Mr. Michael Finkley. He is an educator and author, and he talks about first generation um, college graduates and how you get in school and just the impact of that. And so many of us are still are first generation college grads. So that is something also that we need to talk about and the impact of that. I want to also let you know that next Sunday, Mr. Frank Knapp of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce will be joining us to talk about the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce, their mission and advocacy. So I welcome all of you back for that also. You are watching A Gathering Place hosted by the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce, and today we celebrated and honored the life of John Lewis and also C.T. Vivian, civil rights giants. And I want to thank Jamarr Brown for joining us and sharing the word about good trouble and necessary trouble with us, and also Ebony Hughes for coming in and also sharing her words about good trouble and necessary trouble. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and have a wonderful evening. And we'll see you Wednesday at 4 o'clock. Thanks, Jamar. Thank you, Ebony.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
All
Good
right. Have a good night.
Bye
night. You
bye.
too.
Goodbye.